The pasta was overcooked, which should have been my first warning. 12 years of marriage, and Jessa had never once served mushy linguine. She prided herself on precision. Every meal photographed for her Instagram before we could touch our forks, every sauce reduced to restaurant perfection. But tonight, our anniversary dinner sat congealing on bone china while she fidgeted with her phone, rehearsing words I could see forming behind her perfectly glossed lips. "Miles," she began, setting down her wine glass with theatrical precision. "We need to discuss our future." I twirled another bite of disappointing pasta, watching her through the candlelight she'd insisted on despite the August heat. Jessa Roven, she'd kept her maiden name for professional reasons, looked stunning as always. Auburn hair swept into that effortless updo that took 40 minutes each morning, designer dress that cost more than most people's rent, jewelry catching the flame like tiny stars. Everything calculated for maximum impact. "I'm listening," I said, though I suspected I already knew where this conversation was heading. Her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced at it, and something shifted in her expression, a flash of guilt, quickly masked by determination. "I want an open marriage," she announced, as if ordering dessert. "Take it or leave it." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I set down my fork and really looked at her for the first time in months. The way her shoulders tensed, expecting a fight, the way her fingers drummed against her wine glass, already planning her victory speech. She'd rehearsed this moment, probably practiced it in the mirror while I was at the office designing buildings for clients who actually appreciated craftsmanship. "I'll take it," I said quietly. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Jessa's carefully composed mask cracked, revealing something raw and startled underneath. She'd expected tears, maybe begging. Certainly not this calm acceptance from the husband she'd spent a decade training to heal. "You... what?" I said I'll take it. I reached for my wine, surprised to find my hand steady. "An open marriage sounds perfect, actually." Her phone buzzed again. This time I caught the name on the screen before she could flip it over. Chad Morrison. Her boss at the PR firm, the one with the Range Rover and the self-made success story he loved sharing at dinner parties. Everything clicked into place with crystalline clarity. "Miles, I don't think you understand what I'm saying." "I understand perfectly." I smiled, and something in that expression made her lean back in her chair. "You want the freedom to explore other relationships while keeping the security of our marriage. It's actually quite reasonable when you think about it." This wasn't the script she'd prepared for. Jessa had always been the director of our little domestic theater, and I'd played my assigned role perfectly. The quiet architect husband who stayed home while she networked, who declined social invitations because she preferred I remain available for her schedule, who'd let friendship after friendship wither because she needed to be the center of my universe. But tonight, something had shifted. Maybe it was the way she'd delivered her ultimatum like a business proposal, or maybe it was the realization that she'd already made her choice before asking for mine. Either way, I felt strangely liberated. "When do you want to start?" I asked conversationally. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. "Start? The open marriage. Should we set ground rules, discuss boundaries? I assume you've thought this through." Another buzz from her phone. Chad again, probably wondering why she hadn't responded to his earlier message. I'd met him at enough company events to recognize the type. Charming in that aggressive way some men mistake for charisma, always touching Jessa's arm when he talked to her, always finding reasons to keep her late at the office. Yes, of course I've thought it through." She was scrambling now, trying to regain control of a conversation that had veered wildly off her planned route. "But maybe we should discuss this more before making any hasty decisions." "Nothing hasty about it," I interrupted gently. "You've clearly been considering this for a while. I respect your honesty." The lie came easily. There was nothing honest about this dinner, nothing spontaneous about her request. This was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to give her permission for something she was already doing. The late nights, the new lingerie, the way she'd started showering immediately after coming home from client dinners. I wasn't as oblivious as she'd assumed. "Miles, you're being strange." "Am I?" I thought I was being supportive. I raised my glass in a mock toast. "To new beginnings and open minds." She didn't drink. Instead, she studied my face like she was seeing me for the first time, searching for the trap she was certain I'd set. But there was no trap, at least not the kind she expected. I was simply calling her bluff in the most unexpected way possible, by agreeing completely. Her phone rang this time, Chad's name flashing insistently. She declined the call, but not before I saw her thumb hover over the answer button. "You should take it," I said mildly. "It might be important." "It's not." "Jessa, we're about to embark on a new phase of our marriage built on honesty and openness. The least we can do is start tonight." For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Confess that she'd been seeing Chad for months. That this dinner was just her way of retroactively legitimizing an affair that had already begun. But Jessa had never been comfortable with genuine vulnerability, only the performance of it. "Fine," she said finally. "Yes, let's be open. But I want you to really think about what this means, Miles. Are you sure you can handle it?" The question was meant to make me reconsider, to expose my jealousy and possessiveness so she could position herself as the reasonable one. Instead, I found myself genuinely curious about the answer. Could I handle it? The old Miles, the one who'd spent 10 years shrinking himself to fit into the margins of her ambition, probably couldn't. But sitting here watching her fumble through a conversation she'd expected to dominate, I realized I wasn't that man anymore. Maybe I never had been, just someone playing a role that no longer fit. "I think I can surprise myself," I said. We finished dinner in relative silence, the weight of unspoken truth settling between us like fog. Jessa kept glancing at her phone, clearly frustrated by Chad's continued attempts to reach her. I found myself wondering how long they'd been planning this moment, whether he was waiting somewhere nearby for news of her success. When we got home, she disappeared into the bedroom to return some work calls. Through the thin walls of our craftsman bungalow, a house I'd restored myself over 5 years of weekends, I could hear her voice drop to intimate whispers, not discussing quarterly reports or client strategies, but something softer, more personal. I sat in my study, surrounded by architectural drawings and half-finished models, and opened my laptop. My email inbox held the usual collection of project updates and vendor communications, but buried near the bottom was something I'd almost forgotten, an invitation to Helena Trenwall's gallery opening sent 3 weeks ago. Helena and I had been friends in graduate school, back when I'd had opinions about art and literature, before I'd learned to defer to Jessa's preferences in all matters cultural. She'd moved to the city 2 years ago to curate contemporary exhibitions, and we'd exchanged occasional emails about her shows. I'd always meant to attend one, but Jessa inevitably had other plans for our weekends. The opening was tomorrow night. Without allowing myself to second-guess the decision, I typed a response. "Count me in. Looking forward to catching up." From the bedroom came the sound of Jessa's laughter, light and musical, in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. She was happy, I realized. Genuinely, authentically happy in a way that had nothing to do with our anniversary dinner or the future of our marriage. For the first time since she'd delivered her ultimatum, I smiled. Not the careful, measured expression I'd worn at dinner, but something real and spontaneous. If Jessa wanted an open marriage, she was about to discover just how open it could be. I closed the laptop and headed for bed, already looking forward to tomorrow night. Time to dust off the parts of myself I'd packed away for the sake of domestic harmony. Time to remember who Miles Heron had been before he'd become Jessa's supporting character. Behind the bedroom door, she was still talking to Chad, her voice warm with promise. She thought she'd won, secured her freedom while keeping her safety net intact. What she didn't realize was that she'd just set me free as well. The next morning brought the kind of August heat that made the city shimmer like a mirage. I stood in my office on the 14th floor of the Meridian building, watching delivery trucks navigate the streets below while my coffee grew cold on the drafting table. The architectural plans for the Riverside Community Center spread before me. Clean lines, sustainable materials, spaces designed for actual human interaction rather than Instagram photo opportunities. "You look different today," Jamie Chen observed from the doorway. My assistant had an uncanny ability to read moods, probably developed from years of managing temperamental clients and deadline-stressed architects. "Good different, like you actually slept last night." "Funny thing about honesty," I said, not looking up from the blueprints. "It's surprisingly restful." "Jessa finally admits she's been working late with that Range Rover guy?" I glanced up sharply. Jamie's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something knowing in her dark eyes. She'd been fielding my calls and managing my calendar for 3 years, which meant she'd also been making excuses when I'd called looking for my wife during those extended client meetings. "You knew?" "I suspected. She called here looking for you last month, forgot you were at the Henderson site inspection. When I told her you wouldn't be back until 6, she said, 'Perfect, that gives me 2 more hours.'" Not exactly the response of someone eager to see her husband. I set down my pencil and really looked at Jamie. 28 years old, sharp as a scalpel, with a master's degree in urban planning she was putting to good use while saving for her own firm. She'd never liked Jessa, though she'd been professional enough to hide it during office events. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't my place, and because—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because you seem to need to figure it out yourself. The Miles I met 3 years ago wouldn't have been ready to hear it." She was right. 3 years ago, I'd been so invested in the fiction of my perfect marriage that I'd have dismissed any suggestion otherwise. I'd trained myself not to see the signs, not to ask the questions that might shatter my carefully constructed illusions. "Well, now I know," I said. "She wants an open marriage." "And you said?" I said yes. Jamie's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? Seriously? In fact, I'm going to Helena's gallery opening tonight. Remember her? The curator who sent those exhibition invitations? The one Jessa always found reasons for you to skip?" Jamie's smile was sharp with approval. "This should be interesting." The day passed in a blur of client calls and design revisions, but underneath the routine work, I felt something stirring that I'd almost forgotten. Anticipation. Not the anxious kind that came with navigating Jessa's moods, but genuine excitement about an evening that belonged entirely to me. At 5:30, I packed up my drawings and headed home to change. The house felt different somehow, charged with possibility rather than weighted with unspoken resentments. Jessa was still at the office, probably planning another late night with Chad, which gave me time to shower and select clothes without her commentary on my choices. I chose carefully: dark jeans, white button-down, the navy blazer I'd bought for my college reunion but never worn because Jessa had deemed it too casual for our image. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. When had I started dressing for her approval rather than my own comfort? The gallery was in the Arts District, a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors. I arrived just as the evening crowd was finding its rhythm, young professionals mixing with established collectors, artists explaining their work to potential buyers, the comfortable buzz of people who'd chosen to spend their Friday nights surrounded by creativity rather than reality television. Helena spotted me before I saw her, weaving through the crowd with a grace that made heads turn. She'd always been beautiful, but success had added something extra, confidence that radiated from her like warmth from a fire. "Miles Harron," she said, reaching up to hug me with genuine affection. "I was beginning to think you were a myth." "Just dormant," I replied. "Like a volcano." Dangerous comparison. Volcanoes tend to explode when they wake up. Maybe that's exactly what I need. She studied my face with the same intensity she brought to evaluating art. "Something's changed. You look lighter somehow." Jessa and I decided to try an open marriage. The words felt strange in my mouth, but saying them aloud made them real in a way they hadn't been during last night's dinner theater. Helena's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something like understanding. "And how do you feel about that?" "Liberated," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. We moved through the exhibition together, Helena explaining the pieces with passion that made even abstract installations come alive. I found myself laughing at her observations, offering my own interpretations, engaging in the kind of intellectual conversation that had been absent from my life for so long I'd forgotten how much I missed it. "This is my favorite," she said, stopping before a sculpture that seemed to be made of twisted metal and light. "It's called Metamorphosis. The artist created it after her divorce, when she was discovering who she was outside of her marriage. The piece was beautiful and brutal, suggesting both destruction and creation, endings and beginnings. I understood why Helena had chosen it for the exhibition, why she'd positioned it where the light would catch its surfaces at just the right angle. "It's perfect," I said. "I hoped you'd appreciate it." Her smile held something I couldn't quite identify. "The artist says it represents the moment when you realize that what you thought was breaking you was actually setting you free." We were standing close enough that I could smell her perfume, something subtle and complex, nothing like Jess's aggressive designer fragrances. When Helena looked at me, I felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with being half of a couple or someone's husband. Just Miles, standing in a gallery on a Friday night, talking about art with a woman who listened to his responses like they mattered. "I should probably head home," I said eventually, though I had no desire to leave. "Should you? Or do you think you should?" The question hung between us like a challenge. The old Miles would have made his excuses, hurried home to wait for Jess's return from whatever she was calling work tonight. But the old Miles hadn't been invited to make his own choices. "You know what? I don't think I should do anything tonight except what I want to do." "And what do you want to do?" "Have dinner with you, somewhere we can talk without competing with avant-garde installations." Her smile was radiant. "I know just the place." We ended up at a small Italian restaurant 3 blocks from the gallery, the kind of place that prioritized flavor over presentation, conversation over performance. Helena told me about her work, her plans for future exhibitions, her small apartment filled with pieces by artists she believed in before the world caught up to her vision. I found myself talking about architecture in ways I hadn't in years, not as a business or a means to an end, but as a calling, the satisfaction of creating spaces where people could live and work and connect with each other, the challenge of balancing form and function, beauty and practicality. "Jessa never talks about your work," Helena observed over dessert. "I always wondered if you'd lost your passion for it." "Not lost," I said carefully. "Just learned to keep it to myself." She found my enthusiasm overwhelming. "God, Miles, do you hear yourself?" I did hear myself, and the sound was depressing. When had I become someone who apologized for caring about things, who dimmed his own light to avoid outshining his wife's ambitions? "It's complicated," I said weakly. "No, it's not. It's simple and terrible and completely fixable." Helena reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're allowed to be excited about things. You're allowed to take up space in your own life." Her fingers were warm against mine, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the simple pleasure of being touched by someone who wasn't calculating the gesture's impact on her image. When Jessa touched me these days, it was usually in public, a performance of marital satisfaction for whoever might be watching. "I should probably call her," I said, though I made no move to reach for my phone. "Should you?" There was that question again, gentle but insistent. Should I call my wife to check in, to explain where I was and who I was with? Or could I simply be an adult having dinner with a friend without requiring permission or providing detailed reports? My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Working late again. Don't wait up." I showed Helena the message. She read it and shook her head. "How convenient. She gets to stay out as late as she wants, but you feel guilty about having dessert with an old friend." She was right, of course. The double standard was so ingrained I'd stopped noticing it, like background noise that becomes invisible until someone points it out. Jess's freedom was assumed. Mine required negotiation and justification. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "I think you should stop asking what you should do and start asking what you want to do." What did I want to do? The question felt revolutionary. When was the last time I'd made a decision based purely on my own desires rather than Jess's expectations or social obligations or the careful calculus of marital harmony? "I want to walk you home," I said, "and I want to not feel guilty about it." "Then that's what we'll do." We strolled through the arts district as the evening cooled, talking about books and movies and travel plans, all the conversations I'd been having with myself for years because Jessa found them boring. Helena lived in a converted loft above a vintage bookstore, the kind of place I'd always imagined living before I'd been convinced that suburban respectability was more important than personal happiness. "Thank you," I said as we reached her door. "For tonight. For reminding me that I used to be interesting. You're still interesting, Miles. You just forgot for a while." She kissed my cheek, a gesture so natural and unself-conscious that it took my breath away. No calculation, no performance, just one friend saying goodnight to another. I drove home through empty streets, windows down, music turned up for the first time in months. The house was dark when I arrived, Jessa still engaged in whatever she was calling work. I poured myself a scotch and sat in my study, surrounded by the evidence of dreams I'd been too afraid to pursue. But fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. If Jessa wanted an open marriage, she was about to discover that openness was a door that swung both ways. And after tonight, I was finally ready to walk through it. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. I woke early, as had become my habit since childhood, and found Jessa's side of the bed empty, but still warm. She'd come home sometime after midnight, moving through the house with exaggerated quiet, probably assuming I was asleep. I wasn't. I'd been lying there thinking about Helena's laugh, the way she'd listened to my opinions about the sculpture installations like they mattered. The way she'd touched my hand across the dinner table without calculating the gesture's effect on observers. The kitchen smelled like expensive coffee and guilt. Jessa stood at the island in her silk robe, the one that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, scrolling through her phone while a latte cooled beside her elbow. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully arranged into something resembling wifely concern. "You were out late last night," she said, as if she hadn't been the one to text about working until all hours. "Gallery opening?" I replied, pouring myself coffee from the machine she'd insisted we needed despite my preference for simple drip coffee. "Helena Trenwall's exhibition. Remember her? We went to graduate school together." Something flickered across Jessa's face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation. She'd grown accustomed to my evenings being predictable, spent at home working on architectural drawings or reading while she pursued her own interests. "How nice for you," she said, the words carrying just enough edge to let me know my independence was noted and not entirely appreciated. "Did you have fun?" "Actually, yes. We had dinner afterward, talked about art and architecture. I'd forgotten how much I missed that kind of conversation." The temperature in the kitchen dropped several degrees. Jessa set down her phone with deliberate precision, giving me her full attention for the first time in months. Dinner? Just the two of you? Among other people initially. Then yes, just us. I met her gaze steadily. I thought you'd be pleased. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Both of us exploring new connections? She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling with the contradiction she'd created. She wanted the freedom to pursue Chad Morrison without guilt or secrecy, but she hadn't expected me to interpret open marriage as applying to both parties equally. I just think we should discuss boundaries, she said finally. Make sure we're both comfortable with how this develops. What kind of boundaries did you have in mind? Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at it automatically, and I caught a glimpse of Chad's name before she flipped it face down. The gesture was so practiced, so smooth, that I realized she'd been hiding his messages for months. Well, for instance, I think we should be transparent about our friendships. No secrets. The irony was breathtaking. Jessa, who'd been conducting a clandestine affair for who knows how long, was lecturing me about transparency because I'd had dinner with an old friend. Absolutely, I agreed. Complete honesty. So when did you start sleeping with Chad? The question landed like a physical blow. Jessa's carefully composed mask slipped, revealing something raw and startled underneath. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, maintain the fiction that her late nights and new lingerie were innocent expressions of renewed self-confidence. That's not what this is about, she stammered. Isn't it? You asked for an open marriage 2 days after I noticed Chad Morrison's number showing up on your phone at all hours. You've been working late 3 nights a week since June, always on projects that require his direct supervision. You bought new underwear and started showering immediately when you come home from these extended meetings. Each observation hit its target. I watched her face cycle through denial, anger, and finally, a kind of defensive resignation. Fine, she said, lifting her chin with practiced defiance. Yes, Chad and I have developed feelings for each other, but we haven't acted on them because I wanted to handle this the right way, with honesty and respect for our marriage. The lie was so brazen, so perfectly delivered, that I almost admired her commitment to the performance. Almost. When was the first time? I asked conversationally. Miles, I don't think... The first time you acted on these feelings you claim to have just developed. Was it his office? Your office? That conference in Denver last month? Her face went pale. How did you know about Denver? You posted Instagram stories from the hotel bar. Chad commented on every single one, and his location services showed him at the same hotel. Not exactly covert operations. I'd actually figured out Denver weeks ago, but hadn't allowed myself to process the implications until now. Amazing how much clearer everything became once you stopped trying to unsee the obvious. You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. Her phone buzzed again. This time she ignored it, but I could see the effort it cost her. Chad was probably wondering why she wasn't responding to his good morning texts, maybe getting impatient about whatever plans they'd made for the day. Look, she said, switching tactics with the smooth efficiency of a practiced manipulator. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot with this conversation. I care about you, Miles. I always will. But we've grown apart, and I think we both deserve the chance to explore what makes us happy. I agree completely. You do? Absolutely. In fact, I'm having lunch with Helena today. She's showing me her private studio, the pieces she's working on for next year's exhibitions. Another temperature drop. Jessa's eyes narrowed, calculating this new development and finding it problematic for reasons she couldn't articulate without revealing her hypocrisy. Don't you think you're moving a little fast? She asked. I mean, you barely know this woman anymore. We're getting reacquainted. Isn't that what this is all about? Rediscovering parts of ourselves that marriage might have suppressed? Her phone rang this time, Chad's name flashing insistently. She declined the call, but her fingers drummed against the counter with barely contained frustration. "Answer it," I said gently. "Don't let me interfere with your Sunday plans." "It's not important." "Jessa, we're supposed to be honest now, remember? Chad's been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. You're obviously supposed to be somewhere or doing something with him. Don't let our conversation make you late." For a moment, I thought she might continue the charade. But the phone rang again, and her resolve cracked. "Fine," she said, snatching up the device. "But we're not finished discussing this." She stalked out of the kitchen, already answering Chad's call with a bright, apologetic voice that was nothing like the tone she'd been using with me. I heard her explaining about unexpected complications and needing to reschedule, her words growing fainter as she climbed the stairs to our bedroom. I finished my coffee in peaceful silence, then headed to my study to review the community center plans one more time before my lunch with Helena. The drawings looked different today, sharper, more confident, like they'd been waiting for me to remember why I'd chosen architecture in the first place. Helena's studio was everything I'd expected and more. Housed in a converted church in the Arts District, it soared 3 stories high with original stained glass windows casting rainbow patterns across works in progress. She moved through the space like a dancer, explaining her curatorial vision for upcoming shows, her plans for supporting emerging artists who couldn't afford traditional gallery representation. "This is what I'm most excited about," she said, leading me to a corner where several canvases leaned against the wall. "Local artists, all under 30, all doing incredible work that nobody's paying attention to yet." She pulled out a painting that made me catch my breath, an urban landscape that somehow captured both the beauty and loneliness of city life, the way buildings could shelter and isolate simultaneously. "It's remarkable," I said. "The way she's balanced the architectural elements with human emotion. She's 26 and works at a coffee shop to pay rent. But look at this technique, this vision. She's going to be famous someday, and I want to be part of making that happen." Helena's passion was infectious. She talked about art the way I talked about architecture when I forgot to censor my enthusiasm, with the kind of genuine excitement that Jessa had always found embarrassing in social situations. We spent 3 hours in that converted church, talking about creativity and risk-taking, about the difference between making art and making a living. Helena showed me pieces that challenged my assumptions, artists who'd found ways to express truths I'd never considered. "You should come to the artist talk next Friday," she said as we prepared to leave. "The painter I showed you is discussing her process, and I think you'd find it fascinating." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. We had lunch at a small cafe near her studio, the kind of place where the menu was handwritten on a chalkboard and the owner knew half the customers by name. Helena told me about her plans for the gallery, her dreams of creating a space where art could exist without the pressure of commercial success. "What about you?" she asked over dessert. "What would you do if money wasn't a consideration?" The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked about my dreams rather than my responsibilities? "Community architecture," I said without hesitation. "Affordable housing that's actually beautiful. Public spaces that bring people together instead of keeping them apart. Buildings that serve the people who live in them rather than the developers who profit from them." "So why don't you?" "Because it doesn't pay well. Because Jessa's lifestyle requires a certain income level. Because I've got a mortgage and responsibilities and—" "Excuses," Helena said gently. "All valid, but still excuses." She was right, of course. I'd spent years using financial obligations to justify creative compromise, telling myself that security was more important than satisfaction. But sitting in that cafe, talking to someone who'd built a career around supporting other people's artistic vision, I wondered if I'd been asking the wrong questions. What if instead of asking whether I could afford to pursue my real interests, I asked whether I could afford not to? My phone buzzed with a text from Jessa. Having dinner with colleagues. Don't wait up. Colleagues. The euphemism was almost charming in its transparency. Everything okay? Helena asked. Just my wife letting me know she'll be out late. Work dinner. Helena's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by the explanation, but she didn't press. Instead, she reached across the table and touched my hand, the same gesture she'd made Friday night. Miles, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? The question was simple and devastating. When was the last time someone had asked about my happiness? When was the last time I'd even considered it a relevant factor in my decisions? I'm starting to be, I said. We parted ways outside the cafe, Helena heading home to prepare for an evening gallery event, me returning to a house that felt less like home every day. But for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading the empty hours ahead. Instead, I found myself looking forward to Friday's artist talk, to the conversations and connections that were finally becoming possible. Jessa wanted an open marriage. What she was about to discover was that openness, like freedom, was something that couldn't be controlled or contained once it was released. And after this weekend, I was finally ready to see where mine might lead. Monday brought rain and revelation in equal measure. I stood at my office window, watching water cascade down the glass while Jamie updated me on the morning's client calls. The Riverside Community Center project had been approved for the next phase, which meant months of detailed work on a building that might actually make a difference in people's lives. The planning committee loved your sustainability proposals, Jamie said, scrolling through her notes. Especially the solar integration and the community garden spaces. They want to meet Thursday to discuss timeline and budget. Thursday works. I turned from the window, feeling something I'd almost forgotten, professional excitement that had nothing to do with profit margins or prestige projects. What else? Helena Trenwall called. She wanted to confirm Friday's artist talk and mentioned something about a collaborative project she'd like to discuss with you. I felt that now familiar flutter of anticipation. What kind of collaborative project? She didn't say, just that she had an idea that might interest you. Should I schedule a meeting? Yes. This week, if possible. Jamie made a note, then looked up with that knowing expression I was beginning to recognize. She seems nice. Different from Jessa. I finished. Yes, she is. Good different. It was a statement, not a question. Jamie had worked with me long enough to recognize the changes in my demeanor, the way I'd started engaging with projects instead of just managing them, the way I'd stopped checking my phone every few minutes for messages that never came. The morning passed in productive focus, interrupted only by a text from Jessa around 11. Lunch meeting ran long. We'll be home late again tonight. I stared at the message, trying to remember when her schedule had become so conveniently unpredictable. Before Chad Morrison, Jessa had been obsessively punctual, her calendar planned weeks in advance. Now she lived in a state of constant last-minute changes, all of them requiring her to spend more time away from home. Everything okay? Jamie asked, noticing my expression. Just marveling at the creative scheduling required for modern adultery, I said. At least she's texting now instead of just disappearing. Progress, I suppose. But was it progress or just a more sophisticated form of manipulation? By keeping me informed of her absences, Jessa maintained the fiction that she was being considerate while actually ensuring I couldn't complain about her unavailability. It was masterful, in its way. My phone rang before I could analyze the psychology further. Helena's name appeared on the screen, bringing an immediate improvement to my mood. Helena, Jamie said you called about a collaborative project? I did, but I'm wondering if we could discuss it in person. Are you free for coffee this afternoon? I'm in your neighborhood for a meeting with a potential patron. I can make time. Where would you like to meet? There's a place called Grind on 5th Street. Do you know it? I did know it. a small coffee shop that Jessa had always dismissed as too bohemian for her taste, which probably meant it was exactly the kind of place I'd enjoy. Perfect. What time? 3:30? I'll be there. The rest of the morning flew by. I found myself looking forward to the afternoon with an anticipation that felt almost foreign after months of routine obligations and managed expectations. When had I stopped looking forward to things? Grind turned out to be everything Jessa would have hated. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, the kind of atmosphere that prioritized conversation over performance. Helena was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a notebook open beside her coffee cup. "Thank you for meeting me on short notice," she said, as I slid into the seat across from her. "I know you're busy. Never too busy for an interesting conversation." She smiled at that, and I realized I'd been unconsciously quoting something she'd said Friday night, the kind of easy reference that develops between people who actually listen to each other. "So," I said, settling back with my coffee, "tell me about this collaborative project." "It's probably crazy," she began, then stopped herself. "Actually, no, it's not crazy. It's ambitious, which is different. I like ambitious. There's a space in the arts district that's been vacant for 2 years. The owner is tired of paying taxes on empty property, and he's willing to lease it cheap to someone with a solid plan for community use." I leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of space?" 15,000 square feet, good bones, natural light. It used to be a furniture showroom, so it's got open floor plans and high ceilings. Perfect for exhibitions, but also flexible enough for other uses. "What are you thinking?" Helena's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that made everything around her seem more vivid. "A community arts center. Gallery space for rotating exhibitions, studios for local artists, workshop areas for classes and community programs. But here's the thing, I know nothing about spatial design or renovation requirements. I need an architect." "You need an architect who understands community-focused design," I corrected. "Someone who can balance functionality with aesthetic appeal, who knows how to create spaces that serve multiple purposes without compromising any of them." "Exactly." She reached across the table and touched my hand, that gesture that was becoming familiar and welcome. "I know this is presumptuous, but would you be interested in looking at the space? Just to tell me if it's feasible?" Would I be interested? The question was almost laughable. This was exactly the kind of project I'd been dreaming about for years. Architecture in service of community, design that prioritized human connection over commercial success. "When can we see it?" "Tomorrow afternoon?" The owner said he could meet us at 2. "I'll clear my schedule." We spent the next hour discussing Helena's vision for the center, sketching rough layouts on napkins, talking about the balance between public and private spaces, the flow between different functional areas. I found myself thinking like an architect again, not just a contractor fulfilling someone else's specifications. "This could be incredible," I said, studying our improvised floor plan. "A real community resource, not just another gallery." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I looked up to find her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was professional excitement there, but something else too, something warmer and more personal. "Helena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why me? You must know other architects, people with more experience in this kind of project." She was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because when you talk about architecture, you light up in a way that tells me you still remember why you chose it in the first place. Because you listen when I describe my vision instead of immediately explaining why it won't work. Because I trust you." Trust. When was the last time someone had said they trusted me, not because I was reliable or predictable, but because they believed in my judgment and integrity? "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." "Does it? I hope so." We were interrupted by my phone buzzing with another text from Jessa. "Client crisis. We'll be very late tonight. Order takeout." Helena noticed my expression change as I read the message. "Everything okay?" "Just my wife's increasingly creative work schedule." "Miles." She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I know this isn't my business, but are you sure this open marriage thing is what you want?" The question caught me off guard, partly because I'd been asking myself the same thing with increasing frequency. Honestly, I'm not sure what I want anymore. I spent so many years wanting what I thought I was supposed to want that I lost track of my actual preferences. That's not an answer. No, it's not. I looked at her across the table, this woman who asked direct questions and expected honest answers. What I want is to feel like myself again, to remember what it's like to be excited about projects and conversations and possibilities, to stop apologizing for taking up space in my own life. And the open marriage is helping with that? The open marriage is giving me permission to remember who I used to be. Whether that's what Jessa intended. I shrugged. Probably not. Helena nodded slowly. Just promise me something. What? Don't lose yourself again. Whatever happens with your marriage, don't go back to being the smaller version of yourself. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. I promise. We parted ways outside the coffee shop, Helena heading to another meeting, me returning to the office with my head full of possibilities. The Community Arts Center project felt like a gift, the chance to do meaningful work with someone who shared my values and vision. But more than that, it felt like a beginning. For the first time in years, I was looking forward instead of just getting through. I was making plans based on what I wanted to create, rather than what I was obligated to maintain. Jamie looked up when I entered the office, noting my expression with approval. Good meeting? Potentially life-changing meeting. Even better. Your wife called, by the way. Wanted to make sure you got her text about working late. She called to make sure I got a text? That's what I thought. Seemed like overkill. It did seem like overkill, unless the point wasn't communication, but documentation. By calling the office, Jessa had created a witness to her excuse, made it harder for me to question her story later. It was the kind of detail-oriented deception that spoke to extensive practice. Jamie, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think I've been naive about my marriage? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think you've been loyal to someone who stopped deserving it a long time ago. But naive? No. I think you knew what was happening and chose to give her the benefit of the doubt longer than most people would have. And now? Now you're finally ready to stop giving her doubts the benefit of your loyalty. It was a perfect way to phrase the shift I'd been feeling. For years, I'd been extending trust and consideration to someone who'd been calculating how to exploit both. The open marriage ultimatum hadn't created Jessa's selfishness. It had just made it impossible to ignore. I spent the rest of the afternoon working on the community center plans, sketching preliminary ideas for Helena's art space, thinking about the kind of architecture that brought people together rather than keeping them apart. For the first time in months, I lost track of time in the best possible way. When I finally looked up, it was past 7. The office was empty except for the security guard making his rounds. I gathered my drawings and headed home to a house that would be empty until Jessa finished whatever she was calling work tonight. But instead of the familiar loneliness, I felt something else. Anticipation for tomorrow's site visit, excitement about the project taking shape in my mind, gratitude for the chance to remember what it felt like to create something meaningful. Jessa had asked for an open marriage, thinking she was securing her freedom while keeping her safety net intact. What she'd actually done was remind me that I had choices too. And for the first time in years, I was finally ready to make them. The empty warehouse space exceeded my wildest expectations. 15,000 square feet of possibility stretched before us, afternoon sunlight streaming through original windows that hadn't been covered by decades of improvements. The bones were perfect. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors that would be gorgeous once refinished, ceiling height that could accommodate large installations without feeling cramped. "It's incredible," I said, walking the perimeter while Helena and the owner discussed lease terms. "The natural light alone is worth twice what he's asking." Helena joined me in what would become the main gallery space, her excitement palpable. "Can you see it? The way we could section off areas without losing the open feel?" I could see it. More than that, I could feel it, the way people would move through the space, the conversations that would happen in the workshop areas, the community that would grow around shared creative purpose. "We'll need to address some structural issues," I said, making notes on my phone. "Electrical upgrades, climate control for the artwork, accessibility improvements. But nothing that can't be handled." "So you're in?" The question was professional, but her tone carried something more personal. This project meant something to her beyond career advancement or financial gain. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would outlast both of us. "I'm in," I said, and felt something click into place that had been off-kilter for years. We spent 2 hours measuring and planning, discussing timeline and budget, imagining the finished space filled with art and artists and people, discovering new ways to see the world. By the time we finished, I felt more energized than I had after any project meeting in recent memory. "Dinner?" Helena suggested as we locked up. "I know a place that serves actual food instead of Instagram opportunities." I checked my phone automatically, a habit so ingrained I barely noticed it anymore. 3 missed calls from Tessa, all within the last 20 minutes. No voicemails, but a series of increasingly urgent texts. "Where are you?" "Call me back immediately." "This is important, Miles." "I'm coming home now, and you better be there." "Everything okay?" Helena asked, noticing my expression. "Jessa's having some kind of crisis. I should probably head home." "Of course. Rain check on dinner?" "Definitely." I drove home through rush hour traffic, wondering what could have prompted such urgency. In 12 years of marriage, Jessa had never demanded my immediate presence unless it involved her career or social standing. Given her recent behavior, I suspected this crisis was somehow connected to Chad Morrison. The house was blazing with lights when I arrived, every lamp and fixture turned on as if Jessa was trying to banish shadows from every corner. I found her in the living room, pacing in front of the windows with her phone pressed to her ear. "He's here now," she said into the phone, then ended the call without saying goodbye. She turned to face me, and I was shocked by her appearance. Jessa prided herself on perfect presentation, but tonight her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her designer blouse wrinkled like she'd been clutching it in her fists. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Looking at a warehouse space with Helena. I told you about the Community Arts Center project. You told me about lunch. You didn't mention spending the entire afternoon with her." The accusation hung between us like smoke. After months of working late and client emergencies, Jessa was questioning my whereabouts because I'd spent 3 hours on a legitimate business meeting. "It ran longer than expected," I said calmly. "What's the emergency?" "The emergency is that people are talking, Miles. About you and this woman, about what it looks like when you're out together." "What people?" "Sam saw you at that coffee shop yesterday. Tara's friend noticed you at the gallery opening. People are starting to ask questions about our marriage." I stared at her, trying to process the logic. "You mean the same marriage you wanted to open? The one where we're both supposed to be exploring new connections?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Actually, I don't know it. You asked for an open marriage." I agreed. "Now, I'm forming friendships and pursuing professional opportunities, and somehow that's a problem." Jessa's composure cracked completely. "It's different when you do it." "How is it different?" "Because you're supposed to be—" She stopped, realizing she was about to reveal something she'd kept hidden. I'm supposed to be what, Jessa? Available, she said quietly. You're supposed to be here when I need you. And there it was. The truth she'd been dancing around for months. The open marriage wasn't about freedom or exploration or personal growth. It was about securing her right to pursue Chad while keeping me as a safety net, a backup plan, a reliable source of emotional and financial support while she tested other options. Available for what? You're never here. You work late 4 nights a week, spend weekends at client events, and text me your schedule changes like I'm your assistant instead of your husband. My work is demanding right now. Your work is Chad Morrison. The words hit like a physical blow. Jessa stepped backward, her face cycling through denial, anger, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. That's not... We haven't... Jessa, stop. I know about Denver. I know about the late-night phone calls and the new lingerie and the way you shower immediately when you come home from these extended meetings. I know, and I've known for weeks. She collapsed onto the sofa, all pretense finally abandoned. It's not what you think. What is it then? It's complicated. Complicated how? You're either having an affair or you're not. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her expression had shifted into something I recognized, the calculated vulnerability she used when she needed to control a situation. Chad and I have feelings for each other, she said carefully. But we haven't acted on them because I wanted to handle this properly. That's why I asked for the open marriage. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that I almost admired her commitment to the fiction. Almost. When was Denver? I asked. What? Your first time with Chad? Was it Denver or earlier? Her face went pale. Miles, I don't think... The hotel bar photos, Chad commenting on every single one, his location services showing him at the same hotel. When was it, Jessa? You've been spying on me? I've been paying attention. There's a difference. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Fine. Yes, something happened in Denver. But it was just... We were both lonely, and we'd been working so closely together, and... When was Denver? June. And when did you ask for the open marriage? Last week. So you've been having an affair for 3 months, and last week you decided to retroactively legitimize it by demanding an open marriage. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She turned on me then, all pretense of vulnerability abandoned. At least I'm being honest now. At least I'm trying to make this work, instead of running off with the first woman who pays attention to me. Helena and I are working on a professional project. Professional? Miles, you're having an emotional affair, and you're too naive to realize it. The accusation was so perfectly calculated, so precisely aimed at my insecurities, that it took my breath away. For a moment, I felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Was I misreading Helena's friendliness? Was I projecting my loneliness onto innocent professional interactions? Then I remembered the way Jessa had delivered her ultimatum, the practiced ease with which she'd lied about Chad, the months of manipulation and gaslighting that had brought us to this moment. Even if that were true, I said quietly, at least I waited until after you asked for an open marriage. The words landed with devastating accuracy. Jessa's face crumpled, and for the first time in months, I saw something genuine in her expression. Not calculated vulnerability, but real fear. Miles, please, I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, set better boundaries, figure out how to make this work for both of us. What about Chad? What about him? Are you going to stop seeing him? The question hung between us like a challenge. I watched Jessa's face as she calculated her response, weighing her options, trying to find a way to keep both her safety net and her new relationship. It's complicated, she said finally. That's what I thought. I headed for the stairs, suddenly exhausted by the conversation and everything it revealed. Behind me, Jessa called my name, her voice rising with panic. "Where are you going?" "To pack a bag. I'm staying at Pete's for a few days." "Miles, you can't just leave. We need to talk about this." We did talk about it. You want an open marriage so you can keep seeing Chad without feeling guilty. I want a real relationship with someone who actually wants to be with me. Seems like we both know what we want now. This isn't how this was supposed to work. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. How was it supposed to work, Jessa? You get to explore new relationships while I sit at home waiting for you to decide whether I'm worth keeping around. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For the first time in months, I'm being completely honest about what I want and what I'm willing to accept. And what I'm not willing to accept is being your backup plan while you test drive my replacement. I climbed the stairs to pack, leaving Jessa standing in the living room with all the lights blazing, trying to banish shadows that had already consumed everything worth saving. Pete's apartment above the bar was everything my house with Jessa wasn't: small, comfortable, and completely without pretense. The furniture was mismatched, but functional. The walls covered with photographs from fishing trips and concerts, rather than carefully curated art pieces. It smelled like coffee and old wood, lived in and welcoming. "You can stay as long as you need," Pete said, clearing clothes off the couch that would serve as my bed. "But I gotta ask, are you sure about this? About leaving? About the whole thing? Jessa, this Helena woman, blowing up your life over what might just be a rough patch." I set my suitcase down and looked at my younger brother. 5 years my junior, but somehow older in the ways that mattered. Pete had never married, never bought into the mythology of domestic bliss that had shaped so many of my decisions. He'd watched my relationship with Jessa from the outside, and I suspected he'd seen things I'd been too invested to notice. "It's not a rough patch," I said. "It's been building for years. The open marriage thing just made it impossible to ignore. And Helena? Helena reminds me who I used to be before I started apologizing for taking up space in my own life." Pete nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Miles? Don't make the mistake of thinking the next relationship will fix what went wrong with this one. You've got to figure out your own stuff first." He was right, of course. The temptation was to jump from one relationship into another, to use Helena's attention as proof that I was desirable, that Jessa's betrayal was her loss rather than evidence of my inadequacy. But that would be using Helena to medicate my wounded ego, which wasn't fair to either of us. "I know," I said. "I'm trying to take this slow." "Good. Now you want a beer? Because I've got some thoughts about your wife's boyfriend that might interest you." We sat at Pete's kitchen table with bottles of local craft beer while he shared what he'd learned about Chad Morrison through the bartender's network of gossip and observation. "He's been bringing her here," Pete said. "Not here specifically, but to bars in the neighborhood. Thinks he's being discreet by avoiding their usual spots, but bartenders talk to each other." "When?" "Past couple months. Always the same pattern. They come in separately, sit together for an hour or two, then leave separately. Classic affair behavior." "What's he like?" Pete's expression darkened. "Arrogant, tips like he's doing you a favor, talks down to servers, acts like he's slumming it by being in a place that doesn't serve $20 cocktails. The kind of guy who thinks his Range Rover makes him interesting." I found myself smiling despite the circumstances. "You don't like him." "I don't like guys who cheat on their wives and then act superior about it. Chad Morrison's got a wife, by the way. Monica. She comes to trivia night sometimes with her book club friends." That stopped me cold. "He's married?" "Very married. 2 kids, big house in Riverside. The whole suburban dream. Makes his little adventure with Jessa even more charming, doesn't it?" The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already tangled situation. Jessa wasn't just having an affair, she was helping a married father of 2 betray his family. The woman who'd lectured me about boundaries and transparency was enabling someone else's deception on a much larger scale. Does Monica know? If she does, she's handling it better than you did. But I doubt it. Chad's got that whole devoted family man image going. Coaches Little League, volunteers at school fundraisers, posts family photos on social media like he's running for Father of the Year. I thought about Jessa's complaints that people were talking about my friendship with Helena, her concern about appearances and social reputation. Meanwhile, she was involved with a man who was deceiving not just his wife, but his children, risking not just his marriage, but his relationship with his kids. Pete, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think I was naive about Jessa? About how long this has been going on? He considered the question while peeling the label off his beer bottle. I think you trusted someone who stopped deserving it a long time ago. But naive? No. I think you saw the signs and chose to give her the benefit of the doubt because that's the kind of person you are. And now? Now you're finally ready to stop giving her doubts the benefit of your trust. It was almost exactly what Jamie had said, which suggested I'd been more transparent about my marriage's problems than I'd realized. The people who cared about me had been watching me diminish myself for years, waiting for me to recognize what they could see clearly. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessa. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. I showed Pete the message. He read it and shook his head. She's not used to you having boundaries. This is going to get worse before it gets better. How much worse? Depends on how much she has to lose. If Chad's just a midlife crisis, she might be willing to work on the marriage. But if she thinks he's her ticket to something better, he didn't need to finish the thought. I'd seen Jessa's ambition in action for 12 years, watched her calculate every relationship in terms of social and professional advancement. Chad Morrison wasn't just an affair, he was her boss, her entry into a higher level of the PR world, her chance to trade up from a mid-level architect to a successful executive. I should probably call Helena, I said. Let her know what's happening before Jessa decides to make this her problem too. Good idea. And Miles? Be honest with her about where your head is right now. Don't make promises you can't keep just because you're angry at your wife. I called Helena from Pete's small balcony, looking out over the neighborhood I'd grown up in before Jessa had convinced me we needed to live somewhere more prestigious. The familiarity was comforting. Corner stores and family restaurants, people walking dogs and kids playing in small front yards. Miles, how did the meeting with your wife go? Not well. I'm staying at my brother's place for a few days while we figure things out. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had asked if I was okay and waited for a real answer? I'm getting there. Helena, I need to be honest with you about something. Okay. I'm attracted to you. More than attracted. I think I'm falling for you, and that's not fair while I'm still married and dealing with all this chaos. I don't want to use you as a rebound or put you in the middle of my marital problems. She was quiet for a moment, and I held my breath, wondering if I'd just destroyed the best thing to come out of this entire mess. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. Can I be honest with you too? Please. I'm falling for you too, but you're right. This isn't the time to act on it. You need to figure out your marriage situation first, and I need to know that whatever happens between us is about us, not about your relationship with Jessa. So what do? We keep working on the Art Center project. We stay friends. We see where we are when the dust settles. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Helena was protecting both of us from making decisions based on emotion rather than clear thinking. She was being the adult in a situation where I was tempted to act like a teenager. Thank you, I said, for being patient with me. Thank you for being honest. That's more than most people would do. We talked for another few minutes about the warehouse project, keeping things professional but warm. When I hung up, I felt simultaneously disappointed and relieved. Disappointed because I wanted to lose myself in the possibility of something new and beautiful. Relieved because Helena was wise enough to insist we build something real, rather than just escaping from something broken. Back inside, Pete was making sandwiches for dinner. "How'd it go?" "She's smarter than I am." "Good. You need someone smarter than you. Jessa was smart, but she used it to manipulate you. This Helena sounds like she's smart enough to protect both of you from making stupid mistakes." We ate dinner while watching a baseball game, the comfortable silence of brothers who didn't need constant conversation to enjoy each other's company. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching peace. My phone buzzed periodically with messages from Jessa, each one more urgent than the last. I read them but didn't respond, needing space to think clearly about what I actually wanted rather than what I was being pressured to accept. Around 10, Pete turned off the TV and headed for bed. "You going to be okay out here?" "Yeah. Thanks for this, Pete. For letting me crash, for listening, for not telling me I'm an idiot for taking so long to figure this out. You're not an idiot. You're loyal. There's a difference. But Miles, don't be so loyal that you forget you deserve better." I lay awake on Pete's couch for a long time, thinking about loyalty and love, about the difference between fighting for a relationship and fighting against reality. Somewhere across town, Jessa was probably with Chad, strategizing about how to manage this crisis without losing either her marriage or her affair. But for the first time in months, her calculations weren't my problem to solve. I was finally free to focus on what I wanted rather than what she needed, what I could build rather than what I was trying to salvage. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. And despite everything, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow. The Community Arts Center opened on a crisp October morning with the kind of fanfare Helena had dreamed of. Local artists displaying their work, families exploring the workshop spaces, teenagers discovering that creativity could be accessible rather than intimidating. I stood in the main gallery watching people move through spaces I'd designed with something approaching wonder. "You did it," Helena said, appearing beside me with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe we'd installed in the former loading dock. "You created exactly what we talked about." "We did it," I corrected. "This was always a collaboration." She smiled, and I felt that familiar flutter of anticipation that had been growing stronger over the past month. We'd kept our promise to stay professional while I sorted through the divorce proceedings, but the attraction had only deepened as we'd worked together on something meaningful. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Jessa had fought it initially, cycling through denial, anger, and bargaining before finally accepting that I wasn't coming home. The settlement had been straightforward. She kept the house, I kept my freedom, and we split the rest down the middle like adults who'd simply grown apart rather than enemies who'd destroyed each other. Chad Morrison had been fired from the PR firm after his wife discovered the affair and made her feelings known to his colleagues and clients. Monica had handled the situation with a dignity that made Jessa's manipulations look even more petty by comparison. She'd filed for divorce, secured primary custody of their children, and started her own consulting business with the settlement money. Jessa had tried to maintain the relationship with Chad after his professional downfall, but discovered that her attraction had been as much to his success as to his person. Last I'd heard, she was dating someone new, another executive, another step up the social ladder she'd been climbing since college. "Miles?" Helena's voice brought me back to the present. "There's something I wanted to ask you." "What's that?" "Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not as colleagues, not as friends working on a project, but as 2 people who've been very patient and would like to see what happens next?" I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, without the weight of obligation or guilt or divided loyalty. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was genuine in a way that made everything around her seem more real. more possible. Helena Trenwall, I said. I would love nothing more. Good, she said, standing on her toes to kiss my cheek. Because I've been waiting 3 months to ask that question, and I was running out of patience. Around us, the community arts center hummed with conversation and laughter, filled with people discovering new ways to see the world. It was exactly what we'd envisioned. A space where creativity could flourish without pretense, where connections could form without calculation, where people could be themselves without apology. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged,